small rebel force has penetrated the shield and landed on Endor.
This is where the fun begins.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
This is Rebel Force Radio.
Your source for the Force.
Star Wars news and commentary.
With Jason Swank and Jimmy Mack.
I've seen Star Wars 500 times. Star Wars #1.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Now it's time for Rebel Force Radio.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Well, I'm just sitting here going through my collection of Vanity Fairs, going back to 1999 and the Phantom Menace. And then there was this one. Hey, remember when Lucasfilm PR wanted us to believe that these two were dating in real life? Remember that? They had them on the cover of Vanity Fair. Anakin and Padme. Hayden and Nat. Yeah, that was... No, I think it was... George, loving classic Hollywood so much, and that was sort of the thing back in the day, and like in the 40s, especially, where they would have the couple in a movie, and there would be all these tabloid reports that they were actually secretly dating, and then you'd have like the studio head coming out like the angry dad. I don't want any hanky panky. See, we're making movies here, right? But they really loved it because it was all publicity. Here's the Vanity Fair for, what was this? Was this The Last Jedi? Oh, no, this was the Dark Side cover for Force Awakens. And this was the light side cover here. Vanity Fair with...
Oh, now that's a classic shot.
Yeah, I love this one for episode 7. With Harrison sitting there with Chewie and Daisy Ridley and John Boyega. And we thought, boy, anything was possible.
Yeah, as they sit in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon.
Oh, it's great. But anyway, I was feeling very nostalgic about Vanity Fair because we have a release right now with a big cover story. This isn't just about Kenobi. No, this is about the whole future of Star Wars. We're going to break it all down to you. But the cover of this Vanity Fair issue, of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi is front and center, but you also got Pedro Pascal as the Mandalorian, Din Djarin. You've got Diego Luna as Cassian Andor, which is interesting to see the Andor series sort of stepping into the spotlight and sharing, the attention that is being bestowed upon Mandalorian and Kenobi. You also have Rosario Dawson's Ahsoka Tano there. So it's very cool. It's very cool to see them all together. As if they're leading into some big cross-series event, you might think. But like I say, we're going to break it all down for you. There's also an interview with Kathleen Kennedy in that issue that I think that's where the real meat of it is. The feature story reads more like a big press release. And speaking of press, Ewan and Hayden Christensen are, continue to be on the PR trail. We'll have some highlights from recent interviews with them. Plus, we got Star Wars and pop culture. So much more. We are your, not only are we going to be your Kenobi after show, we're your Kenobi pre-show. We're everything and all things Star Wars. And if you're new to the program, welcome. We appreciate it. Glad to have you here. My name is Jason, and with me, my good friend and yours from Chicago, Jimmy Mack.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Star Wars fans. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack from these new Vanity Fair interviews and the Kathleen Kennedy extended interview, because we got some clarity for the first time on a few things. And as with just about any Kathleen Kennedy interview, we also get more confusion. Info contradicting things that we know. So we're going to try to
with the timeline a little bit on things, I find.
Well, of course, yes, to fit a narrative. But I mean, I don't think there's anything like nefarious going on here or anything. It's all pretty straight up. She's trying to manage the future of the franchise and learn from the mistakes of the past. And I think that's becoming more obvious. With the extended interview, I think we're going to be hearing stuff coming from a more legit place as opposed to a lot of the smoke KK likes to throw out there. There's still some smoke. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's I'm excited to get into it because I think there's actually quite a bit of smoke. Her take on certain things is interesting. Like I feel like she's missing the point on certain lessons. Yes, she's learned a lesson, but what is the lesson that she's learned? That's the question.
But there is something refreshing about this interview is the fact that she, to me, is coming across more human than she has in the past. So I'm giving her a little bit more leeway. And we'll get into that when we break down the interview. Because she comes clean with a couple of things, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But that's Vanity Fair for this week, the Star Wars cover story. The big cover story here at Rebel Force Radio is we are less than a week away from the RFR Rooftop Bash happening Wednesday night, May 25th. We'll be celebrating the 45th anniversary of Star Wars at the 5th. A lot of 5s and 5ths in there, but probably a lot of 5ths will be consumed that night, I hope, because this is a bash. So we want you guys to keep the bartenders busy.
Yeah.
And it's all happening in Anaheim at the Grand Legacy Hotel directly across the street from Disney. You guys have heard us talking about this for the last couple of months. We are so excited to get out there, especially now that we're making all the very final preparations. Everything is getting tightened up and put together. And I'm really excited because we have information to reveal about the bash itself. We're going to have swag. We're going to have Star Wars cocktails. And we got a complimentary menu. First, the swag. What do I get? That's what everyone wants. Stuff. Well, we got stuff for you. We're going to have exclusive laminates, badges. I call them laminates, but they're not really laminates, as my printer has let me know. These are nice, high-quality plastic, for lack of a better term, badges, and they're going to be multicolored, have the RFR Rooftop logo both sides. And it's going to be very exciting. I'm looking forward to giving those away. Our art director, Chris Emmeram, has devised a cool decal that he is going to be handing out. And Kevin Lyle has a mystery giveaway that he will be conducting at some point in the evening. So I'm very excited to see what Kevin, the mastermind behind the Norse Legion, comes up with. And we'll find out next week. Cocktails, Jason. I know this is a subject of particular interest to you. Cocktails.
Yes, sir.
Yes, indeedy. And it will be for me, too, because like I said, this is a bash. So we want you guys to keep the bartenders busy. And here's what we're going to be bringing. We're going to have some blue milk. I'm hoping it's going to be the same concoction that was served up at a Lulu for RFR Live on the South Side 3 years ago at Star Wars Celebration Chicago. But we have a couple of fun other drinks here, Star Wars inspired. We have Rebel Force Radio Rum, all right, which is going to be a rum-based drink with Bacardi and Mount Gay Black Barrel, Myers Dark Rum, lime juice, grapefruit juice, and honey syrup. We're also going to have the That's No Moon cocktail. Old-fashioned bourbon, cherries. It's going to be delicious. It's kind of like an old-fashioned, I think. And the blue milk. And so that's going to be fabulous. I can tell Jason is already drooling thinking about that bourbon-based cocktail. That's No Moon. Well, maybe we can pour enough down Jason Swank's gullet so we'll actually see the Swank Moon at some point that night. Full moon, baby.
Nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to see that.
All right, here's what we got for food. Comp food. We have Kitster crudité, served with hummus and spinach dip. It's a vegetable crudité.
Gee, I wonder who came up with that.
Loved by Kitster. I think made by Kitster. It's Kitster's actual recipe.
Oh, all about the authenticity here.
Yeah. You're going to be saying that's so wizard as you chew on that crudité, that Kitster crudité. Moss Espa Market fruit. We're going to have a big display of fruit directly from the Moss Espa Market. Seasonal berries, strawberry dip. It's going to be delicious. Zero the Hut cheese display, ladies and gentlemen. Domestic and imported cheeses, crackers, and dried fruit, olives, mango chutney. Delicious. We'll have appetizers being passed around on the rooftop of the 5th. We're going to have Admiral Akbar Ahi Poke Taco. We're going to have the classic Jimmy Mac and cheese bite, Skywalker spring roll, vegetable, Aunt Beru bruschetta, Rancor short ribs, and swanky sliders.
Wow,
Pulled pork, classic beef, and schnitzel. The swanky slider.
You can't forget the schnitzel when you're making a swanky slider, folks. It's a key ingredient.
And because I know you love dessert, Jason, you have a sweet tooth. I've taken note of this over the last decade and a half, where everything has to stop when dessert is served. So I made sure we're serving dessert with mini Death Star donuts, accompanied by chocolate sauce, raspberry sauce, and caramel sauce. Or drunken Death Star donuts, served with tequila, lime, orange liqueur, or coffee liqueur.
Oh, man. This is some spread. I can picture it in my head. It's going to be unbelievable. We already looked at a schematic of what the setup is going to be. It's going to be just phenomenal. The view of us at the stage with the background and potentially fireworks going off, and you got food stations all around. Yeah, it's going to be great. There's going to be something cool, at arm's length, no matter where you're sitting. It's going to be great.
Fireworks are on the Disneyland schedule for that night. And from what I've seen of weather reports, it's going to be beautiful on Wednesday, May 25th. We're looking at sunny skies, high in the low 80s, low in the upper 60s. It's going to be fabulous.
Yeah.
So we want you guys to join us there at the 5th. There's only a few tickets available. I can't stress. You don't want to wait till the day of to get tickets, because I think it's a long shot that tickets will be available the day of. I mean, check. But just to guarantee that you'll be there if you're sort of on the fence right now, you're not sure, go ahead and grab those tickets, because I really don't think they're going to be around the day of the event. We're really looking forward to it. Puppet Lando's going to be there. Puppet Zero's going to be there. We have a few surprise guests and a lot of fun. A lot of fun to be had. The Babu Freaks will be there. And friends of the show, names you've heard over the years. Maybe even a Star Wars celebrity or two.
Never know.
So that's all happening on May 25th. At the 5th, Rebel Force Radio, all ages are welcome. For the Jimmy Mac and Cheese Bites alone. Bring out the kid in all of us, really. I can't believe it's going to be next week. This is a convention.
Well, I can't tell. I just want to make sure that all the listeners know that look, there is no staff at Rebel Force Radio. There's never been a staff. We've had people over the years, made some great friends, listeners that have become really good friends that have helped us out here and there. And but this has been a labor of love for Jimmy Mac, as all of or most of our bashes really have been. But this has got Jimmy Mac's fingerprints all over it. He's been working hard for months. So I'm glad to see it finally come to fruition. And it's definitely the most beautiful venue we have ever had for one of these things. I can't wait to get there and see it finally in person. It's going to be great.
We're going to have a blast. We want you guys shooting video, taking pictures, posting up about it on social media. And
nothing.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important, because we can't do it ourselves, as Jason said. There's no staff. And plus, we're the ones who are going to be hosting it. So it's virtually impossible for us to shoot video at the same time.
Yeah.
But please, videos, photos, hashtag it, Rebel Force Radio. And I can't wait to see everyone there.
Yeah.
In Anaheim next week. It's going to be a ball.
You must contact me.
Play back the entire message.
What message? Message after the message.
The Emperor commands you to make contact with him. It's a trick. Send no reply.
Hi, it's Adam from Austin, Texas. Had a couple questions for you guys. Do you think we are headed towards a Darth Vader series on Disney Plus, just about him, or some sort of movie just featuring him? The second question I have is, do you think we will ever see a new villain that ever comes close to being as well known as Darth Vader? I think maybe in Star Wars would be the only place that could happen, like a new villain created there. Thanos is the only one that I could think of most recently that has some influence like him, but still well short of Darth Vader. I'll hang up and listen. Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay. I'll hang up and listen. How long was that guy on hold? No, thanks. That's a great question. Well, and it does dovetail really nicely into some of the coverage that we're going to be getting into about Kenobi, and particularly as the creatives and, in this case, the actor himself, Hayden Christensen, talks about what the sides of Vader that we're going to see in this series. And they do talk about it being personal. Deborah Chow has called it a love story between, in a sense, between two brothers, Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi. And she's not talking about Revenge of the Sith or their whole arc. She was specifically talking about this series, Kenobi. Now, whether or not that, that's evident with the show that we're about to see, we'll see. But nonetheless, they do seem to be taking this to a much more personal place, adding additional dimensions to these characters. I think that if Vader really does, if the fans really embrace this version of Vader, this Kenobi version of Vader, I think that we will get a series. I think there's always been talk and rumors about a Vader series percolating in the background. They've got Hayden Christensen back. Jim, I think if it goes over well, I see no reason why they wouldn't do that.
No, that has to be something that they're mining because they know that they're going to strike gold if they nurture the character properly. The biggest problem with the legacy characters is that when they put them into play, there's always the fear that whatever they do with the character will then handcuff future creatives who may want to then use the same character. And this is something Star Wars is going to have to learn how to work with. It appears that we are getting the Vader series with Kenobi. That is more than I thought we'd get for the longest time. But I really do think that if there were to be a Vader exclusive series, a lot of it does depend on what happens here with Kenobi. There's been expressed fear from guys like Jon Favreau about making a character like Boba Fett sort of a one-trick pony. And while it would be cool to see him being a badass all the time, they don't really feel comfortable with applying a story to it. There's not much of a storytelling opportunity they feel they have. Now, I disagree with that. I think that if it's executed to its best potential, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to have a movie about Darth Vader in his prime or Boba Fett in his prime as a bounty hunter, being this cold, calculating, silent bounty hunter killer.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a cop-out when they say that. I don't know. I think maybe if you have the right approach and think about it outside the box, there are a lot of compelling things you can do with a character like Darth Vader in his absolute prime, where he's not dealing with the baggage of a relationship to Obi-Wan Kenobi or his former life as Anakin Skywalker, where he's fully committed to being Darth Vader and doing the things that Darth Vader fully commits to doing.
Yeah.
That, I think, is definitely fertile territory. But I see resistance from Lucasfilm up and down. Maybe somebody will come up with a great idea. That's what I think.
Yeah.
We need someone to come up with the great idea that will get Disney to open up the pocketbooks and make a Darth Vader movie happen. That has to be on the radar. It's probably in development right now. That's what I'm guessing. That there's something with Darth Vader, a streaming series or a feature film, something. But then there's that reluctance to continue using legacy characters as well. There's a lot of thoughts swirling around in my head because we haven't really opened up this Vanity Fair magazine very much so far. But there's information in all of that leads me to believe that Lucasfilm is very tentative about moving forward with legacy characters of any type. And that the only reason the Kenobi thing is really happening is because it had been in development for a while, and they have Ewan McGregor. That's the big thing. That's the big sell here. They have Ewan. Hayden Christensen, that was a slam dunk. I mean, second the phone rang, he said yes. But Ewan,
I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I think that there was a little bit of convincing that needed to happen with Hayden Christensen. I don't like.
We'll
the
talk
idea
about that later.
Yeah, that he's desperate waiting for the phone call. I don't think that's the case.
It's Star Wars. It's Star Wars. I'm not saying anybody has to be desperate, but there's a recognition of the impact that the franchise has and the fact that it's on a pedestal as far as Hollywood entertainment goes. I'm not saying that he's desperate, but I'm just saying that returning to Star Wars, I mean, it's the same thing with Carrie Fisher. When George first brought up the idea, the notion that there could be a sequel trilogy, they were at that lunch together in Orlando. And Carrie said, yes, right away. I'm in. And Hamill looked at her like, whoa, back it up a little bit, Carrie Fisher. We need to negotiate a little bit here. We can't be signing on to this thing for scale just when it gets mentioned to us. Let's negotiate a little bit here. And Mark was the last holdout for the sequel trilogy. Harrison even signed on before Mark did, from what I understand.
Yeah, I heard the same thing. I heard the same thing. Well, hey, and Mark wanted to make sure that he got paid well. Carrie, I think the difference is Carrie Fisher had a relationship with Star Wars fandom for years leading up to the sequel trilogy. You can't say the same for Mark Hamill. He only started to really hang out. I think Celebration Japan. I think a lot of people were shocked that he went to Celebration Japan. He kept Star Wars at arm's length for a long time. It's hard to remember because in the most recent years, especially since signing up for the sequel trilogy, he's been all over it, and thank goodness. But he wasn't. I think he had a challenging relationship with Star Wars, probably a lot like Hayden Christensen did. Because it can be a bit of a curse in some ways for some actors. Daisy Ridley's one that has been very public about sort of the curse of Star Wars. But the other part of the caller's question, Jim, is will there ever be a villain as iconic as Darth Vader? And he says it would have to be in Star Wars, wouldn't it? Because that's the only, and he throws up Thanos. I don't think that we'll ever see, certainly in my lifetime, I don't think we'll ever see a more iconic movie villain than Darth Vader. I think it had to do with the time it came out, the ability for a movie to become such a cultural phenomenon as movies were in that period of time. And it was just a special moment. I don't think we'll ever experience it. Mainly because there's probably more entertainment now being broadcast and streamed than there ever is. So to get that critical mass of focus and attention on a story, on a character in a film, I think there's just too much noise out there for anything to break through to that degree.
The way it breaks through is how meme-worthy is the character.
Yeah, now.
And you make a bunch of good memes based on the character. Then that's the measuring stick for popularity today. I say that mostly tongue-in-cheek. But mostly. But, Darth Vader that was lightning in a bottle. That was lightning in a bottle. And like Jason said, there's a lot more noise. There's a lot more elements on the playing field than ever before. What in pop culture is going to be universal ever moving forward? That's a hard thing to figure out. And that's why these franchises are now so in the spotlight, is because nothing new can really break through. Even the most popular things are still, entertainment's become so niche. There's you know what you watch, you see what you stream. We're not in a world anymore where everyone sees the same movies and TV shows and things like that. I don't know if anything will ever live up to some of the entertainment we've seen coming out over the last 80 years. It seems like we're on kind of a downward slope as far as Hollywood creativity goes.
Certainly when it comes to films.
Yes, and the public's willingness to embrace new and different things. Like I said, it's all become so segmented now.
Yeah.
Will we ever see something like Star Wars grab people? No, you only see it from classic entertainment. Even the example brought up here was Thanos. I remember seeing Thanos in comic books when I was a kid, when Star Wars was first coming out. Thanos is nothing new. There's nothing new about that. The only thing that I think has really broken through on that level is possibly the Harry Potter books in the last 25 years. The Harry Potter books really broke through and became culturally very important.
Yes, Harry Potter.
It was all new. It was all fresh.
Yes, Harry Potter as a character and as a series of books and series of films, yes. But if you were to have a photograph of Darth Vader and Ralph Fiennes as Voldemort and go around and go to different, foreign countries all over, I guarantee you it would be 10-1 that would know Darth Vader versus Lord Voldemort.
Right.
And I'm not
necessarily putting, and I'm not necessarily even bringing up Voldemort in the same conversation as Darth Vader, although you could. I'm not really doing that. I'm just saying that is a cultural touch point. The Harry Potter thing is really the only thing in the last 25 years that has made such a difference on such a scale. That's the only new mythology I've really seen to break through on such a mainstream scale. And even then, its popularity doesn't even come close to what Star Wars was in the 70s and 80s and has been now as it has been molded into a franchise. So,
the last couple of films have sort of struggled in Harry Potter, and they've had, it has not had the, it has not had quite the staying power to the extent that Star Wars did. But Star Wars also had what we can look back now as sort of the luxury of having that dormant period where it created this insatiable demand, because that was at a time, Jim, before the internet. Like, there was nothing available to us as fans, nothing during those dark times. And so it created this incredible groundswell of anticipation for it. Whereas Harry Potter, something like a Harry Potter and even Lord of the Rings, but again, you can't even really say Lord of the Rings is new. People were reading that book in the 70s. So
in the 60s,
Yeah, right. So it is a unique thing. It's really hard to compare some of these franchises, but I think that Darth Vader has, as a character, has the image of Darth Vader has even transcended Star Wars. I mean, it's just, it's beyond movies. It's just up there with some of the biggest iconic figures and images you can imagine. So,
or it sets a new standard, quite honestly.
Right.
So, yeah.
But great question.
Unfortunately, I think the answer is no. I just don't, and it's based on basically the direction Hollywood has gone into by recycling the past over and over and over again, and the fact that public consumption just is too fragmented, and something like that probably wouldn't ever catch on to the degree of Darth Vader.
Yeah, you could probably make a very similar comparison to what happened with radio, how the radio stations all tended to splinter and really focus on one particular sound. And so bands that have sort of that cross genre, struggle a little bit. I remember hearing somebody say, Jesus, it's a good thing the Beatles didn't come along, now, because what radio station would play the Beatles? It would have been all over the place because they didn't fit into a particular niche. You could say the same thing about, television entertainment because it is fragmented. You can choose your own. Oh, if you're a Disney guy, you just get Disney Plus and you get your steady stream of your Marvel and your Star Wars, and you may never be exposed to something like we were just talking before the show started, something like a Yellowstone, right? There's a bunch of Yellowstone fans out there, but if all you're doing is watching Netflix and Disney Plus and you don't have Paramount Plus, you're not going to watch Yellowstone. You won't even have an option to watch it. It's fascinating new era that we're in. So it makes it, it makes for those big cultural moments when everybody's watching. You know, there's things in history like, you know, the Who Shot JR episode of Dallas, where it was something like literally half the entire nation watched that episode. Things like the Super Bowl, the Oscars of days, you know, gone by, where you had half the country watching all at one time. And I know I'm speaking, you know, about the United States, but that's what I know, folks. That's what I know. So anyway, all right, let's get to it. We got lots to cover in headlines.
I have good news for you, my lord.
That's good news. Come closer, I have good news.
All right, we got to talk about the big Vanity Fair issue. And, of course, there's a feature story. And there's some things worth unpacking, as Jimmy Mack said, that feature in the feature. But really, if you want to get under the hood of what's going on with Lucasfilm, that interview with Kathleen Kennedy that was released online. I'm assuming it's in the. I actually don't have. Did you get the floppy? Is it even out yet?
No, I don't have the magazine itself, but from what I understand, the interview with Kathleen Kennedy is an online exclusive. Okay, well,
yeah,
that's what I believe. Yeah.
Okay, so between the two articles, and we'll kind of vacillate back and forth because pretty much all of the quotes of Kathleen Kennedy in the feature story are from the one-on-one interview that she does. So let's talk a little bit about the schedule. Let's go through the schedule. And Jim, this is pretty much note for note what we predicted. We talked about what we assumed the schedule was going to be from the end of Book of Boba Fett onward through into next year. As we predicted, Andor will hit screens late summer. So probably like an August start for that after the Bad Batch. They don't mention Bad Batch, but Bad Batch will probably come out in early summer. It'll probably have like a June, July.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. Yeah. We'll find out more at the convention.
Yes. Season 3 of Mandalorian will drop in late 22 or early 2023. So that's obviously still in post-production. And we'll see where it lands. I'm sure they'd like to get
production slowed down by the COVID pandemic, of course. So while late 2022 has always been targeted, now they're opening up the door to possibility of early 2023. But everything is just going along fine with production of The Mandalorian Season 3, from what I understand.
Yeah. Rosario Dawson, next year, the Ahsoka series, so sometime next year.
That's in front of cameras right now.
Yeah, probably too hard to say when that will be, what slot it'll be. I don't think we'll have to wait until winter of 2023. I think that if anything, Ahsoka might be in that spring, sort of May the 4th slot.
Exactly.
Would be my guess. The Acolyte. Well, that's still in development. I don't think they've even begun filming that, but it's a ways off at this point. Further off, they say. Slightly further off. Scant details, more details, and we'll talk about that here in just a few moments. But the one note that they mentioned, which is pretty cool, is that Ewan McGregor's wife, actress Mary Elizabeth Winstead, will be in Ahsoka. And Ewan McGregor talks about that in the article about how their son, who was born a year ago, is growing up on the sets of Kenobi and Ahsoka.
That hasn't been officially announced by Lucasfilm, but it gets its unofficial announcement here in Vanity Fair. And by the way, I just want to say, Jason, at the top of the show, you said this article reads like a press release.
Yes.
And I have to agree with you very much. These interviews were all conducted in March. And I believe that in order for Vanity Fair and Anthony Bresnikan to get access, they sign off to a lot of editorial access for Lucasfilm PR to get in there and pick apart the interview and make sure that only what they want to be released is being released. So Ewan McGregor slipping up and saying Mary Elizabeth Winstead is going to be in Ahsoka is perfectly fine with Lucasfilm because this all goes through their filter. That's how a guy like Anthony Bresnikan keeps getting called back time and time again, is because he allows them that editorial access to his reporting. That's what I think. Okay, it's not like anybody's told me this, but I've seen patterns with the way a lot of this information gets divulged in articles like this, and it's always the same writer attached to these articles.
Yeah, it's
they're in bed with each other,
and we'll get to it when we get into the Kathleen Kennedy interview. But they're softball questions, and they're teed up. It's almost as if they know the answer in advance, so they're going to tee it up so that the person that they're interviewing can deliver their talking point answer. It's all very, very almost scripted. It really
sanitized and scrubbed through.
Yeah.
And I only say this because Lucasfilm has tried to exert editorial control over this very podcast over the years. So that's where I'm coming from. And I don't mind coming clean about that. I don't mind coming clean about that.
Ewan had a funny quote about his son and his partner Mary doing Star Wars. He says, my partner Mary is doing that Star Wars series with Rosario. It's about to start. And he says, our little boy has been born into this massive Star Wars family. He will either embrace it or really go the other way. I don't know. Maybe he'll be a Trekkie. Let's hope not. Let's hope we can avoid that.
Is that a threat?
Love starting.
Is that a threat? That's what I would say if Ewan McGregor was my dad and I got mad at him. He's like, all right, I'm going to go watch Star Trek now, Dad. Maybe even a Deep Space Nine. That'll show him.
Oh, but it was kind of refreshing to get a little news on ANDOR because there's probably been the least, Jim, of all these series. It's really had the least amount of attention, though it was, one of the first shows that was announced. I feel like we've known about it forever. It started filming, if I recall. I feel like it started filming before Kenobi. Like just before Kenobi.
I think you're right. I think you are right. Andor is slated for 3 seasons.
Yeah.
And it has been shot in England.
Mm-hmm.
So they're away from the prying eyes of Manhattan Beach and Los Angeles and all of that. We have seen set photos taken by various photographers out there in England.
Fans.
But other than that, yes, things have been, because they're shooting in shopping malls and places like that, train stations, or I should say tube stations. And people have been exposed to seeing Star Wars being shot locally. But as far as the plot goes, we have not heard much at all. The only thing I know is K2SO. He's not going to be in the first season of the show. And some more information gets revealed here in this article.
Yeah, so Diego Luna talks about, where he was when he got the call that they were doing the series. He talks about riding in this taxi, and he's in Mexico City. But he sounds very excited. He describes the show as a refugee story with desperate people fleeing the empire at the full force of its power. He says it's the journey of a migrant. That feeling of having to move is behind this story, very profoundly and very strong. That shapes you as a person. It defines you in many ways and what you are willing to do. Now, Tony Gilroy is the showrunner of this series, which is great because the story is that he really saved the film, or at least brought it back in line with what Kathleen Kennedy and the Disney Lucasfilm folks wanted. Didn't know that they wanted it. Because remember, and we're going to get to this in a little bit, they wanted a war film And Gareth Edwards delivered them a war film, and they about, you know what, crap their pants. And it's like, well, wait a minute, wait. When we said war film, we didn't mean a war film. So Tony Gilroy came in and did a lot. And that's not to take anything away from either Gareth, because I think that I think Gareth is a tremendous filmmaker and he certainly loves Star Wars. And I think he gave them exactly what he had signed up for. That which, you know, obviously becomes a pattern in the history of these films. Solo, anyone? But Gilroy talks about it. He says, this guy, talking about Andor, the character, gave his life for the galaxy, right? I mean, he consciously, soberly, without vanity or recognition, sacrificed himself. Who does that? That's what this first season is about. It's about being really revolution averse. So we've got, you know, the prototypical rebel, Jim, being averse to this kind of thing. So we're going to see some growth here. How does he go from being somebody who is just not into joining rebellions or fighting back or any of that, probably being very self-centered, to, you know, making the ultimate sacrifice.
Wow. It sounds like he's the exact opposite of Luke Skywalker at the beginning of this. You know?
Yeah.
Luke always wanted to go off and find adventure. And he's revolution adverse. He wants to stay home, not get involved. Like Uncle Owen wanted from Luke. And that's the Andor we're going to be introduced to at the beginning of this film.
Yeah, they describe him as being cynical. Yeah. They describe him being lost, kind of a mess. And it begins with the destruction of Andor's birth world. So this
destruction of the world.
Yeah.
So that tells me we might be seeing a Death Star appearance in Andor.
Indeed.
What's the best way? Oh, well, I guess, no, we're not going to see a Death Star. What? I'm nuts. Ladies and gentlemen, I've lost my mind. Of course, this is a prequel to Rogue One. The Death Star is not even, it's still under construction during this point. That can't happen. What's the matter?
Well, it's built by Rogue One. The thing's built by Rogue One.
but it's not going to destroy his home world.
Well, but okay, but
the first test they do is on Jakku. That's the first test they do. Remember when they
Jakku? That's where Ray is.
They give Krennic the option.
Not Jakku
or Tarkin. Tarkin gives Krennic. No, Krennic gives Tarkin the option. He says we can blow the whole planet up, and Tarkin says no. We're just testing it. We're not. This is no manifesto. This is not a big statement like that. They just wanted to destroy the city.
The city, yes, yes. But it wasn't Jakku.
So that's the first time. But that's the first time they ever used the Death Star super laser. So obviously, any prequel to Rogue One, it's impossible to feature the destructive power of the Death Star.
All right, two things.
Star Destroyers.
You kept saying Jakku. It's not Jakku. You're talking about Jeddah.
Jakku. Jeddah.
Okay. All right.
This whole segment, that whole conversation there was just very embarrassing for me. And I'd like to admit that now. No, it's not Jakku.
Well, but I said, when you said that the Death Star could appear, I agreed with you. But what I was thinking more is the technology that they then install on the Death Star, because we've seen this in Rebels, where they're working on what am I thinking of? The main weapon of the Death Star, and the ability to, with the kyber crystals, to create that laser. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they could still destroy a world. They destroyed Geonosis, and that was before the Death Star.
They're obviously able to use technology to enforce their evil rule.
Yeah.
And there's always been this story about Tarkin visiting a planet that was going through a rebel uprising. And he shows up at the planet on his Star Destroyer, and they lower the Star Destroyer into orbit right above the city, sort of like how it was on Jeddah in Rogue One, with that Star Destroyer right above the city. And to quell the rebellion, he just landed the Star Destroyer on the city. Took out everything. Took out everything and everyone. Just landed the thing right on the city.
It's just like a fat guy just laying on top of you. That's all it was.
Like in a wrestling match.
Right, I was thinking like Andre the Giant just lays on you. Like, what are you going to do?
Looking for the 10 count. Right. But that's how Tarkin... So they say Tarkin did that. Yeah. And so we're definitely dealing with an advanced technological empire that has the ability to destroy worlds, as they say in this article. His world has been destroyed.
And don't feel bad, by the way, because when I first read this last night, I'm reading it and I go, oh, he must be from Alderaan.
No, I should know.
Yeah, I did. I said to myself, I go, oh, he must be from Alderaan.
Damn it. You know what just happened there? You had me contemplating that. We have to move on. We cannot continue this conversation. Every talking point for the last 5 minutes has been flawed. I say we start the whole show over.
All right,
Jason,
here we
hit
go.
The theme.
You ready?
Hit the theme. Yeah, I'm ready. There we go. Let's get it, Star Wars.
No.
All right. Let's get it, Star Wars.
Let's get it, Star Wars.
What's going on?
Look, folks, I mean, it's hard sometimes to keep this stuff straight. Everybody does. I mean, you know.
I'm distracted by the rooftop bash and all the planning for that. You got to cut us some slack.
You know what it takes for us to travel with all this gear and all of this, all these plans, traveling across the country. It's a lot of stress. It's a lot of stress. I'm freaking out.
Jerry!
All right, getting back to Andor. Yeah, the destruction of his birth world follows him into adulthood. And he realizes that he can't run forever. His adopted home will become the base of our whole first season. So that's a big clue. So don't look for a lot of planet hopping in season one. It sounds like they're going to be pretty much planted in on one world, and that's his adopted world. And then we see another planet that's completely taken apart in a colonial kind of way. The Empire has expanded rapidly. They're wiping out anybody and anybody who's in their way. So the show also focuses on, now check this out. I thought this was very interesting and a little exciting. So if you're a Mon Mothma fan, get ready, because Genevieve O'Reilly, which we knew she comes back, but it sounds as though her story and Andor's story are going to be running parallel in this. So, you know, kind of in the same way where Book of Boba Fett was telling multiple stories in the Boba Fett timeline, this might be bouncing back and forth between Andor and Genevieve O'Reilly's Mon Mothma. So she is in Andor, her story will run parallel to the title character, whom we know will eventually become one of her key agents. So it's a huge orchestral Dickensian ensemble, says Tony Gilroy.
Well, it's interesting that you have one character, Cassian Andor, who is building himself up to be a rebel, and you have another character, Mon Mothma, who is building a rebellion. And their stories are going to be told simultaneously, side by side. So we'll be seeing the origin of a rebel and the origin of a rebellion. And I think that's going to be pretty exciting. I like Genevieve O'Reilly. She was great in the deleted scenes from Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, right. You were great in those deleted scenes. Something every actor wants to hear. Man, you really nailed it in those scenes that only people that bought the Blu-ray saw.
And they're sitting there going, are you going to buy an autograph ticket or what? It's only $50. That is the truth, man. Hey, I'll tell you what, I was looking at some ticket prices for Star Wars Celebration 2 and comparing them to the ticket prices of the big event going on next week. And
what's a Ewan McGregor autograph going
$300. $300, my friend. And people, and it's sold out.
Oh,
yikes. I mean, Ashley Eckstein was signing autographs for $25 like 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now her autograph is $125.
Wow.
And that's something, because she's like been one of the most accessible Star Wars actresses. She's a voice actress too, on top of it.
Yeah.
125. So, I mean, and all power to her to do that. I think Ashley deserves every penny, and her character is one of the most popular.
Right.
So, obviously, the price meets the demand. Everyone wants to have an encounter with Ashley.
Yes, because you talk about somebody who's put the time in. I mean, it's very few of the celebrities on that circuit that have put the time into these shows and giving back to the fans like she has. Mm-hmm. And it is by making herself accessible. Look at Stan Lee. I look at that guy and I'm like, do I have a Stan Lee autograph I don't know about laying around? Rest in peace. But I feel like that guy had been around forever and there were still lines. Jim, remember we were doing a show and we were somehow our table got in the Stan Lee line. It was
the line was so long. It ended up in our booth.
It did. People were like, "Are you in line for Stan Lee?"
Why are you people here? I recall saying, "Oh, we're in line for Stan Lee." And I think by the end of the day, me and Swank were like, "Hey, I think we're in line for a Stan Lee autograph. Shall we get one?" We just kind of segued into the line
just by default. So there's a little bit about The Mandalorian, and if there's anything we haven't heard so far about The Mandalorian, it's been pretty well covered and documented how the idea came to be. But there were some surprises. Something that I didn't realize, Jim, was that the way it's told is that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau were both working on Mandalorian stories or Mandalorian concepts at the same time, competing projects, you might say. That's the first I'd ever heard of this. Kathleen Kennedy says that she had the idea of, well, let's put these two kids together.
Yeah. That's pretty much how her side of the story is about it. But I don't think Jon Favreau would have ever considered doing any work in Star Wars without consulting with Dave Filoni, because the two of them worked together on the Clone Wars, very famously so. It was Dave Filoni who actually recruited Favreau when he was at Skywalker Ranch working on the sound mix for the very first Iron Man film. And he was there, and they were developing Clone Wars, and that's when the two of them connected, and they brought Favreau on board to do the voice of Pre Vizsla. So Favreau had already been baptized on the planet Mandalore by this point.
Right.
And he had a working relationship with Dave Filoni. The two of them worked together on Clone Wars. And Favreau felt a connection to that character, clearly. And the Mandalorian culture, as it were, that was laid in front of him at the time. Now, we know Dave Filoni obviously had a very strong connection to Mandalorians and everything like that. I mean, he worked with George Lucas on developing that story, and George threw him curveballs for sure, especially when it came to the Mandalorians, when he told Dave that they're pacifists in this era of the timeline. And Filoni was like, what? How could that be? And Lucas said, people are never just one thing. Cultures evolve and change over time. And
because Filoni, I said so.
I think Filoni, yeah, right. And I think Filoni walked away from that going, yikes, we're missing some great storytelling situations here that we need to be taking advantage of them.
Right.
Why make them pacifists? And Dave probably had a lot of ideas for things to do with the Mandalorians at that time, but was kind of handcuffed by George Lucas's creative vision, as anybody would be in that situation.
Imagine if George Lucas at that time, he walks into your office or you walk into his office and he says, yeah, I got an idea. The Mandalorians are going to be pacifists. They're going to be ruled by a woman who's Obi-Wan's old girlfriend. It's almost like he was deliberately trying to give Dave impossible situations to work through. Like it was almost a form of hazing. Yeah, write a story about that.
Yeah. They're pacifists. Well, no, he probably led off with, we're going to be bringing the Mandalorians back. And then Filoni went home and didn't see George for like 2 weeks. So Filoni's mind starts racing. Oh my God, the Mandalorians, this is be incredible. And he comes back to the next meeting with Lucas and has all these ideas. And then that's when George lays the pacifist angle on him. And so Filoni's deflated. Oh my God, I've spent the last 2 weeks obsessing over this. I came up with all these great ideas and stuff. So what does Filoni do? He puts it away in a folder, and then Lucasfilm gets sold, and Kathleen Kennedy has a line going out of her office for people pitching new Star Wars ideas. Guys like John Knoll, who was in there to pitch Rogue One. And we also know that Zack Snyder was in there pitching a Star Wars film, which was rejected, and now he's crafted that into his own unique kind of movie, which is currently in front of cameras right now.
Joe Johnston was going after the Boba Fett idea?
Well, he had mentioned it in an interview once, that he would like to see a Boba Fett spin-off film. And I had never even considered character-centric spin-off films in the past. But Joe Johnston brought that up, and that got my mind racing. What could they do with Boba Fett? I don't know if he was ever actually in meetings with KK. But Filoni had all these ideas, and I'm sure he was in line with John Knoll, Zack Snyder, and all those other guys to go in there and pitch his idea for Mandalorians, and wanted to make a film or a series about them. And so now at this point, you have Bob Iger saying, look, we're going streaming heavy. Alongside that, Kathleen Kennedy says, look, we're putting the Star Wars films on hiatus. So that holds the door wide open then for Jon Favreau to have a meeting with Kathleen Kennedy to discuss his Mandalorian idea. A Mandalorian, maybe that series was being developed with Dave Filoni in mind. You never know.
Yeah, see, this is the part that I struggle with a little bit, is that when Kathleen Kennedy tells the story, is that she approached Jon Favreau in a pretty non-specific way. Basically, would you like to come and work with us on Star Wars? Period. It wasn't about, do you want to do a TV show? Do you want to do it about Mandalorian? It was none of that. And he replies, not only would I like to do it, but I'm coming to you with an idea. I have an idea.
Right.
So the odds of Filoni and Favreau working parallel, not communicating with each other on a Mandalorian Star Wars project, I just don't find very likely, knowing that they had a relationship that went back many years, specifically about Mandos. So do we honestly believe that Favreau has got this idea and he doesn't text his buddy Dave Filoni? I think it's crazy.
I think it got put out there. Hey, Favreau's really into doing something with Star Wars. He's telling people. And of course, the pipeline is wide open to Lucasfilm because Favreau is connected to Marvel and Disney live action.
Right.
And has been since the mid-2000s. So it's easy then for that pipeline to stay open so Favreau and Kathleen Kennedy have this meeting, and then Favreau goes off and starts working. While Kathleen Kennedy is thinking to herself, oh, well, he wants to do a Mandalorian show. I told Filoni that he can develop a show. What am I going to do? Oh, I got the idea. I'll bring the two of them together. Look at me. I'm so wise. But these two are probably already working together.
Well, that's the part. Yeah, I just don't buy it. Mm-hmm. I don't buy it that they're both working without talking to each other. I have a hard time buying it. And they even Bresnikan in the article is like, "Oh, you arranged a play date." So yeah, she brought them together. Okay, fine.
I am so glad that Bresnikan put that quote in her mouth, because when I read it in the edited article, it just says Favreau and Filoni were friendly, but Kennedy feared a turf war might erupt. She devised a fix. Quote, I arranged a play date, she says. And I thought, that's just like kind of demeaning, like what
it's condescending.
John and Dave are their children, and you're the mom or something. Is that what is that? But no, it was Bresnikan who put that lame quote in her mouth and then just ran with it as if she came up with that quote right on the spot. So I'm really, really happy that for once we're getting the full transcript of the entire interview, so things don't get taken out of context like that. Because I easily took that out of context. I saw that quote, I arranged a play date and thought Kathleen Kennedy was being really arrogant with that statement. And I'm so relieved to know that that did not come from her.
It wasn't her
I wouldn't have
statement.
known.
Right.
I wouldn't have known. So it just makes me go, how much of the rest of this article is kind of contextually on shaky ground? So,
yeah, there is. Yeah, like I said, it does just reek of PR. It's more certainly not any investigative reporting or probing, and I don't mean it doesn't have to be adversarial. You know, we've interviewed a lot of people on this show. Dave Filoni, one of them, many, many times. And we would ask Dave Filoni tough questions. And Dave seemed to really like the tough questions. The tougher it was, the more he liked it. And he didn't want us to just sit around in a mutual admiration society. He wanted to hear from fans. I remember him holding court on floors at conventions, at Rebel Force Radio parties at conventions, holding court with people around him, just peppering with questions. Why this? Why that? He never ran away from those kinds of conversations, ran right into those conversations. So I struggle with a little bit of this origin story of Mandalorian, though we'll never know. No, but we know we can read between the lines.
Kathleen's perspective. It's told from her perspective, but I think that there was some things going on behind the scenes that pushed her into making the decision to bring Favreau and Filoni together. And it's great. I mean, she even says herself in this article, she was lucky. And I love that she is coming forward with that and being transparent about it. I was so lucky that this happened, you know. She's no fool. She had it all put there right in front of her.
Yeah.
So,
well,
but I don't think it was like a brainstorm. She's sitting there going, well, you know who would be great for Star Wars? Jon Favreau. I'm going to have a meeting with him and pick his mind, and I'll put him together with Dave Filoni too. That'll be great. No, it was like the pieces on the playing board all got moved into a certain position. So she had one move to make. She had one move to make.
Yeah,
and it was orchestrated perfectly.
Yeah,
I mean, look at the things you do at your job to get your boss to agree to things you want. Think about that for a second.
We all do that.
Filmmaking.
Yes.
And if you think that's not going on in the world of filmmaking, you got another thing coming, man.
Yeah.
Happens everywhere.
You're absolutely right. The best way to get your action on your idea is to make your boss think that they came up with it. I mean, that's classic, of course.
This is one of the oldest tricks in the book.
Right, no doubt. And we're very fortunate. But I would say that I remember in those early days of the acquisition, it was no foregone conclusion that Dave Filoni was going to continue on with Lucasfilm. No. He was like everybody else, just waiting for the hammer to drop on him. Yep. In fact, I don't think they knew what they were going to do with him, to be honest with you, at first.
Not at first.
Yeah, they canceled Clone Wars on him. They slashed the budget for future projects. So everything that he worked on in terms of, he and George worked on progressing animation for TV down the tubes. I mean,
the entire
Rebels
animation
is a great
company itself was disbanded.
Yes.
So, I mean, his army was executed.
Obviously, he had the endorsement from George Lucas. He had the skill. There's no question about that. The knowledge of Star Wars. He knows how to make Star Wars probably better than anybody next to George Lucas.
Fan support thanks to Rebel Force Radio.
I was just going to say, but the other big factor, yes, of course, was Rebel Force Radio. No, it wasn't just Rebel Force Radio, but it was the credibility that he had with fans. Because keep in mind, when Disney, there was a lot of cynicism when Disney took over. And especially when it became very apparent that George wasn't going to have any real role. What are we going to do? And it wasn't just this show. It was all over. Fans, Dave Filoni And we did help create a platform for him in those early days. There's no question about that. We'll take full credit. Thank you very much. But Dave Filoni had something that Kathleen Kennedy didn't have, that Jon Favreau wouldn't have had, that Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams, none of them had, and that was credibility with Star Wars fans. Deep credibility. And I'm sure that was not lost on Kathleen Kennedy. They go online, they see the comments, they know what people are talking about. And everyone was saying, why are they hiring all these different writers for these movies when they got the guy that learned at the knee of the maker himself, George Lucas? So,
well, Dave did have to earn that respect and confidence. He did have to earn that because he had no live action career. We had known forever that he had wanted to segue into live action and that George Lucas was teaching him a lot about that, but he was still based in animation his entire career. So we know that Filoni had that drive. That's no surprise. That's no surprise at all.
Yeah.
But to put him in charge immediately, he would have gone through all the same growing pains that Kathleen Kennedy went through, that the story group went through, that the producers and J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, all of them went through these terrible growing pains because they just rushed into it with their head down like bulls. As a result, there was destruction in their wake. And now I think there's a more tempered approach being taken toward this when they've used the last decade or so to really hone certain individuals and put them in the right position. Remember, the fan base was very pumped up for J.J. Abrams to come in and direct that first film. We thought he was coming in for the full trilogy. And that's where I think he may have let Kathleen Kennedy down. I think Kennedy was looking for him to be a consistent presence throughout the entire trilogy situation. But Abrams didn't want to commit. He had too much on his plate. So they started bringing in other filmmakers to kind of play a game of pass the baton.
Yeah.
It was just an impossible situation.
Well, when they announced that Rian Johnson would be writing and directing episode 8, I remember interpreting JJ's justification for his new role as executive producer akin to what George did with the original trilogy. George went in, he directed the first one, he stepped back, wrote the story, but didn't write the screenplay for the second and third and had other directors. So my interpretation of that passing of the baton at the time that we were being told about it happening, this is before we saw the films, was that he was going to graduate into that George Lucas role where, he'd probably be on the set a lot and he would be helping to craft the story, but that is not what happened at all. And Jim, you're absolutely right, because something that comes back in all of this, whether it be the interview or the feature story, a theme that keeps coming back with Kathleen Kennedy is commitment. She keeps praising Jon Favreau's commitment. She says that Star Wars isn't something that you can just come in for a year and shoot something and leave. She goes, no, it's a 3, 4, 5 year commitment. And we've learned that now.
Yeah.
And that's pretty profound because that flies in the face of what appeared she was hiring for. So on the one hand, you can say, whoa, she's disappointed that JJ didn't stick around for the long haul, but her hiring did not indicate that she was looking for anybody. She was going for the flavor of the month, it seemed like, in her hiring.
I just that initial hire, I thought Abrams was on board for the whole 3 films, the entire trilogy. And when it didn't work out that way, I was surprised. I thought Johnson was going to be on board for the next 2 films when they announced he was going to be around.
Right.
I think they said he was going to direct the second one and then write the third one.
Yeah.
I believe that
at
was
one point.
the
It changed so much back and forth.
Yeah. We got more Rian Johnson information coming up here in a minute.
I want to jump over to the Kathleen Kennedy interview because we were talking about the Favreau Filoni stuff. And so she talks about, she said, I wanted, consequently, once John wanted to get involved in Star Wars, I had known for a long time that Dave Filoni had always been interested in making a transition from animation to live action. I have known this almost from the moment I came into the company and really encouraged him. I tried to create opportunities for him to come over to London, to be on the set of the features, to talk to our directors, to get a sense of what that transition might look and feel like. So I said to Favreau, him, it sounds like a tall tale, you need to sit down with Dave. Have you met him yet? Not because I thought that Dave was going to immediately jump in and start directing, but because I knew that Dave would be a huge, huge added bonus to John's vision. And that's where the Playdate thing comes in. She says, now she does confess that she's aware that they work together, or she says, Dave obviously remembered, get this, Dave obviously remembered when Jon Favreau had come in and done voices a couple of times on the Clone Wars, but they didn't know each other that well. Now they're two peas in a pod. I mean, they just work together beautifully. That's not the impression I got. The impression I got was they're there at I don't know, would that be at Skywalker or the Presidio? Dave's working on Clone Wars. Favreau's over at Skywalker Sound doing mixes on Iron Man. The two bump into each other and it's like, hey, what are you working on? Oh, what are you working on? And they would show each other their stuff. You know, Favreau showing Filoni Iron Man before anybody gets to see it. Filoni showing Favreau Clone Wars stuff. They struck up a friendship. And Dave's like, you should come in and you should voice this guy and that guy, whatever. And so to say like Dave vaguely, I'm putting in words, I shouldn't be that dishonest. Dave obviously remembered when John came in and did a couple of voices, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I want listeners to know that a lot of this is spin. A lot of this is, well, you said it best. It's her version of the story from her point of view.
Right. Does your boss know what other coworkers you're pals with?
That's a good point. They don't. They don't always.
And Favreau and Filoni may have been a little coy with Kathleen about how well they know each other too, because they were plotting behind the scenes to create this Mandalorian show, making Kathleen think that it was all just happening organically in her office, which right. I mean, listen. Speculation, folks. Speculation.
Of course.
I've been watching these dominoes fall for a long time, okay? and I understand people and working together on creative collaborations and things. And I know there's psychological games that go on behind the scenes constantly because people want to push their own creative vision across.
Here's another quote that jumped out at me from Kathleen Kennedy. She says, we depend on people like Favreau and Dave and J.J. Abrams and the filmmakers we've worked with like Tony Gilroy. We put the basic guardrails around what makes something Star Wars. Those fundamental values inherent in Star Wars, that sense of place, the deeper meanings around selflessness, selfishness, and the mythology that George created. Then we pretty much leave them to their own devices and try to support that. Okay. That's not the impression that I get from the filmmakers and the heavy-handed approach that they were taking with projects like Solo, to the point where the film's 80% done. They throw the Lego movie guys out. They bring in Ron Howard. That doesn't sound to me like just setting up a few guardrails and then just letting them go.
No. Again, I think a lot of these comments are made from the perspective of someone who has learned from their mistakes. And I don't think she's necessarily talking about the culture of the company as it was when they were creating the sequel trilogies. Sequel trilogy, I should say. I think she's really talking about what's happening presently and the fact that they have creatives in there now who they believe gets Star Wars, and they're able to give them the creative license then to take the ball and run with it. That wasn't necessarily the case when you're dealing with guys like Lord and Miller and Gareth Edwards or Josh Trank or Colin Trevorrow, etc. This is something that they had to go through, these growing pains. I knew this was going to happen the day George signed the dotted line and sold the company. whenever there's a legend stepping down, you never want to be the replacement for that legend. You want to replace the replacement. That's how it works.
Yeah.
And then things start working correctly. No one said Star Wars was going to run on smooth waters once George Lucas stepped away. I mean, it's a tall freaking order. It really is. And I'm not saying this to make excuses for anyone. I'm just trying to expose reality of the situation here. It was never going to be a smooth ride with George Lucas stepping away, being alienated from the franchise he created after selling it, and then with the bean counters at Disney applying all the pressure in the world with release dates for films that didn't have titles, scripts, directors, cast, nothing, not even an outline. But the film is coming out in 2 years. What film? They put the creatives, they put them behind the 8 ball from day flipping one. It was an impossible situation, and it was largely influenced by greed, by Disney corporate mishandling. You have to look at it that way more than blaming Kathleen Kennedy. Now, Kathleen Kennedy, when she goes out public, she does all these really frustrating things, says frustrating things, and sometimes blatantly lies. And she's admitted to the lying even. She's the public face of Star Wars, so she's going to take the bullets that come with it. Now I think she's doing the smart thing by putting the creatives who get Star Wars, putting them in front. A guy like Jon Favreau has the clout to be able to run with the ball. He's committed. That's the thing. You think J.J. Abrams loves Star Wars and everything. To J.J. it was a gig, you know? Get in, get out. He was reluctant to sign on the dotted line in the first place. And then a guy like Rian Johnson, you put a contract in front of him, hell yeah, he's going to, yeah, I'm going to make Star Wars. He knows what it means. He knows the boost his career is going to receive from something like that. And same thing with Colin Trevorrow. All these guys, they were just the wrong voices to have at the table because they were the flavor of the week. Star Wars needs more substance than that. And I think they get it now. And so I think when she says something like we're giving these guys, when they come in with visions that fit what we think Star Wars is all about, we'll let them take the ball and run with it because they know what they're doing. And it's about time. That's all I got to say. It's about time because we've been fooled by smoke and mirrors. We have been fooled with smoke and mirrors ever since the Disney films started coming out. Now I think there's some legitimacy behind some of the Star Wars storytelling that's coming out of Lucasfilm because of guys like Favreau and Filoni. We'll see how Deborah Chow does. We'll see how Taika does. We'll see how these guys fit into the, if they could fit the mold. And Kennedy's looking for more long-term commitments from these people, which is the right way to do it. But it just had to happen organically. And nobody ever had the chance with Bob Iger in charge, taking control of Star Wars and thinking, okay, we got the name, that's all we need. I'm happy to see Kennedy taking more control of the situation, quite honestly, if that is what's happening.
Yeah, I got a different take. I mean, I don't think she's learned. I don't see any evidence that she's learned much, and I'll give you an example here. So the question from Bresnikan is: you've mentioned a couple times that Star Wars is one unified story. That's immense pressure. If Warner Brothers makes a Batman film that doesn't work, they can reboot and do a different Batman film. But I don't think you can really say the Obi-Wan series we made doesn't count. This is Kathleen's response. She says, we also can't do something with Luke Skywalker that isn't Mark Hamill. We're not going to suddenly go try to do that. The beauty of Obi-Wan Kenobi is Ewan desperately wanted to do this. Now, I wouldn't necessarily characterize Ewan as desperately wanting to do it. I wouldn't like that if I was Ewan McGregor. Desperately wanted to do it. No.
Yeah, I'm sure he bristled when he read that. I'm sure he bristled.
Fans were asking him to do it. She says, he has been so engaged in the entire process, and our excitement and reason for doing this is the real Obi-Wan. wanted to tell his story. He got excited by the idea. We got excited about the idea that Ewan McGregor wanted to come back, and Hayden Christensen wanted to come back. I think Hayden Christensen wanted to come back when he was asked, would you come back? Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's sitting there waiting for the phone to ring. But the problem here, it gets... One, I think she's mischaracterizing the level of desperation that they had to do this project. They're just so desperate to come back to Star Wars. But Bresnikan says, I don't want to put you in an awkward spot, but was this an understanding you've come to that was developed from Solo? I don't want to trash. Listen to this word here. I don't want to trash Alden Ehrenreich. I think he did a good job. But the idea that you can't really replace Luke Skywalker was something that you learned. Was that something you learned from that movie, or how would you put it? She says, maybe. As you say it, Anthony, maybe. I think back, and Solo was one of the first ideas that came up when the company was sold. One of the first people I went to was Larry Kasdan. Larry and I have known each other forever. I was so excited. He was so excited to tell that story. We genuinely believed at the time it was a good idea. So yeah, there should be moments along the way when you learn things. That may certainly have been a learning moment. Some people have talked about how, well, maybe Solo should have been a TV show. But even doing Solo as a TV show without Harrison Ford as Han Solo, it's the same thinking. Maybe I should have recognized this before. We would never make Indiana Jones without Harrison Ford. Having just finished the 5th movie, I can tell you there wasn't a day I was on the set where I was like, yes, this is Indiana Jones. As she's sitting there promoting a series with a successful recasting of a legacy character, she's going around saying that you can't recast these people. You can't do projects without them. You can't tell a Luke Skywalker story without Mark Hamill. And at the same time, Mark Hamill's not even recognizable in this series. If we didn't have Disney Gallery, we wouldn't know that Mark Hamill was involved at all. They're using a computer effect for his voice. They're completely they're deep faking it. There's no reason for Mark to be on the set other than for really cool photo ops and maybe to take some cues from his performance physically that the stand-in actor can incorporate into the performance. But I think for Kathleen Kennedy to sort of chalk up the lack of success of Solo because of Alden Ehrenreich and the fact that you can't recast these legacy characters, she's completely missing the point, and she's not taking any responsibility for it. She's throwing it on the fact that they cast poor Alden in the damn thing. I think it's terrible.
Well, I'm sure she was involved in the casting of Alden Ehrenreich in Solo, and I'm very confident that she was involved in that because it was Steven Spielberg who first put Alden Ehrenreich out on the playing field. It's you can Google the story about how Alden Ehrenreich did something, screened a video at like a Spielberg family event, and it's a whole story out there. But that eventually led Alden Ehrenreich to start getting discovered in the first place. And I'm sure it's the Spielberg connection to Alden that led him to Kathleen Kennedy.
But there was no talk, but there's no recognition about the fact that this film came out on the heels on the most divisive Star Wars film ever, The Last Jedi.
Definitely a factor.
Of course it was a factor. The bad timing of the release.
Yes.
So my point is...
There's a laundry list of reasons why Solo failed.
I don't think Alden Ehrenreich is on that list. In my opinion.
Oh, I do. I do because it's obvious that the general box office ticket buying public did not care for a Han Solo film starring anyone else but Harrison Ford. This is coming right on the heels of the character played by Ford getting killed off in The Force Awakens. The timing was awful. And Alden Ehrenreich has half the presence on screen that Harrison Ford does. Never once in the film did I feel like I was watching Han Solo. Never once. That's me. That's why. Listen, I know there's a lot of people Star Wars fans, hardcore fans who really like Solo, and they're all about having a sequel to it and everything. But that's never going to happen. And Kathleen Kennedy is once bitten, twice shy by the whole process. I was extremely disappointed by Solo across the board, and it becomes more and more obvious with the more time that has evolved since that film came out. You could point to all the problems. There's Marvel movies out on the screens at the same time. The Last Jedi was divisive. I think the bottom line with Solo is it's just not a good movie. That's my opinion, okay? And I think there's a lot of people out there who share that opinion with me. Now, I am a hardcore Star Wars fan, and I am sympathetic to the hardcore Star Wars fans who really, truly love Solo. But you guys are a minority. You are the hardcores. And those are the only people who like Solo. I'm so sorry to break it to you, but it's true. People who like Solo make excuses for the film. It's not a good movie, in my opinion. Not even saying it's not a good Star Wars movie. I think it's not a good movie, and I'm so glad to hear. I find it refreshing to hear Kennedy saying this stuff. Now, she does throw Alden under the bus, sort of indirectly, but directly.
Yeah, okay. That's my problem with it. This has nothing to do with what you or I think about Solo as a movie. This has to deal with the fact that you have the CEO taking little to no accountability for the failings of this, and you got the interviewer.
That's where she's blaming it.
Yeah, she's blaming
Harrison Ford is a tough act to follow. He's like one of the most successful actors in Hollywood history. To fill his shoes is impossible. And they didn't recognize this. Kennedy says when they were shooting Indiana Jones, she couldn't imagine anyone else playing that character. Well, they underestimated Harrison's connection to Han Solo and what makes that character work.
We'll see where Indy goes, because the rumors are that this is a handoff to an Indiana Jones-like character that will take the franchise in new directions, and it's likely going to be a female Indiana Jones-type character.
I was just going to say, what's her name?
Yeah, right. Well, exactly. So again,
Jane.
That's really my problem with any of this is the fact that this woman contradicts herself. You let her talk long enough, she contradicts herself consistently. I don't think that she comes across as being. I don't know. I don't
know. I said sincerity in a lot of this unedited interview. She says maybe I'm closer to.
Well, anyone can be sincerely dumb.
She
I
says
think she comes across as dumb,
she's,
honestly.
Again, she's an executive sitting in an ivory tower with her version of the way things happen. Her version might not be connected to reality, and she'll never find that out. But she says in this thing, maybe I'm closer to the DNA of Indy and always have been than I was when I came into Star Wars. I find that to be a very refreshing and revealing comment from her. She's actually admitting that she has some deficiencies when it comes to understanding the DNA of Star Wars. And that's something we've talked about for a long time. And I think the only way that things are going to progress further with the Star Wars franchise is if these things are recognized and fixed. And it seems like after the rough ride that the sequel trilogy was, that a lot of these issues are being addressed and fixed. And so that gives me a sense of optimism to a degree, you know? It really does. It really does. I would never have expected her to admit that.
What is she admitted?
She's not close to the DNA of Star Wars like she is Indy. Because she's shown that she doesn't have the grasp of Star Wars that somebody in her position should definitely have. So for her to even recognize that is huge. Because then she'll hopefully get the right people in there to do the job. That's what I'm saying. I just have a feeling there's more transparency in some of her comments here in this unedited interview as opposed to the sound bites we got presented in the actual magazine coverage.
Oh, that's definitely the case. There's much more to talk about in this. Here's something that's very interesting. And Jim, we had a question last week about this from a Rebel Force Radio listener about does Obi-Wan Kenobi realize at the time of this series that Vader and Anakin are the same? Kathleen Kennedy says And the question is about Deborah Chow, but that's not really what's relevant here. What's relevant is Kathleen Kennedy says that Chow has explored the interior life of Obi-Wan because we find Obi-Wan at a point when he thinks he's killed Anakin.
Boom.
He thinks he's killed Anakin. That's where we meet him. He's at a pretty low point.
We will get that revelation.
Yes, sir.
From Obi-Wan. He's alive. He's alive.
Now, here's a direction that the interview took that really surprised me. Is on the topic of Obi-Wan, Bresnikan throws in a sequel trilogy nod. Now, I don't know if that was by design, by accident. We got to give our little tip our hat here to the sequel trilogy. But he ties it in. He says, "I've heard that Obi-Wan was possibly one of the resolutions, the Rey mystery box." Resolution that Rey would be a descendant of his. I heard this idea was carried along for a while. Then it was put aside partly because Ryan had a different approach. Big surprise. But also because Lucasfilm didn't want to tie up Obi-Wan for a different story down the line. Is that about right? Because at one point this was going to be an Obi-Wan film, maybe even a trilogy of films. Now, here's where I will give Kathleen Kennedy some props. I like the way she answers this. She said, the bigger issue is talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi as a Jedi Master and the issue of attachment and selflessness. In order for Obi-Wan to have a child, you are really, really impacting the rules around the Jedi. What does that mean? If that were explored, and certainly there were a lot of ideas being thrown around, but anything to do with Obi-Wan in that regard was pretty much off the table because it flies in the face of everything George created in the mythology. We're not rigid about it. It's certainly open for discussion all the time, but that's a pretty significant tenet in the mythology of the Jedi that we'd be reluctant to mess with. So I'm going to give Kathleen Kennedy props there because I never really liked that idea very much. I mean, I was sort of like, as the sequels were unfolding, I was sort of like a person dying of thirst in a desert, and I was going to grab anything wet, and there was certainly some moisture in that idea of an Obi-Wan Kenobi origin for Rey, but it wasn't going to be a very satisfying or long-lasting quench of the thirst the more I thought about it. And I do like the fact that she's saying it was just too much of a departure from what George had established. So I appreciate that. Very
consideration of the foundations and integrity of Star Wars is something that I think is really important. It doesn't matter what direction you're going to be pushing the franchise in. It needs to be steeped in the reality of that integrity of what George Lucas threw out there. I imagine over time, things will evolve and Star Wars will turn into something very different. Should the franchise continue, which there's no indication it's ever going to slow down at this point.
No.
But I don't think that any harsh turns should be made at any given point, like was attempted with The Last Jedi. I think that it needs to evolve naturally into that direction. You can't just flip a switch and change Star Wars. It has to evolve over time and go through natural evolutions, not forced ones, not artificial evolutions, but real, actual changes to the story through time.
Yeah.
Patience.
Speaking of changes to the story, do you remember when Episode 9 was coming out and it was the end of the Skywalker saga? The end. That's
when they were saying all of that stuff. That really changed my perspective on the two films that came out previously, Episode 7 and 8. More so about Episode 8 than anything else. Because I'm like, okay, fine. You're going to flip a switch and try to turn Star Wars into something it's not? Let's see where we go with this. Let's go. Now, if it was like Episode 8 of 12, then I'm like, okay, let's evolve the story.
Right.
But for them then to try to subvert the entire Star Wars story and subvert our expectations of where that story was going, only to wrap up the story in the very next chapter. That made no sense to me at all. And that's when I lost all faith and confidence with where they were carrying on with the sequel trilogy. A lot of people will say, oh, Jimmy Mack, he loved The Last Jedi until Kyle Newman and Paul Bateman told him how to think about it. And then everything changed. That's not true. The thing that really, the thing that broke the camel's back for me was that announcement that episode 9 was wrapping up the Skywalker saga. And that really bummed me out because I'm like, okay, well, I'll go on these bold swings if you guys are going to take us on a ride. But if you're going to, jerk us around and tell us we have to get off at the next stop, then what are we doing this for?
Yep.
What's the point? It was a white flag. It was a white flag announcement. It was a we give up.
That's exactly what it was. We can't do it.
Yep.
It's too hard. Stories about, well, I tried to write it, and every time Luke came onto the screen, nobody cared about any of the other characters. Well, you're a bad writer.
Awful. Yeah, those were terrible excuses. And here we are trying to be optimistic, trying to pump ourselves up as a fan and use our platform to promote excitement and optimism for the trilogy. And we felt like we got our knees cut off. Can somebody just cut off knees? I think the thing is, I think we got our legs cut off at the knees. At the knees is what is. But us, we just got our knees cut off. Just kneecaps on the floor.
This end of the Skywalker saga comes up. Bresnikan says, how important is it to get outside the gravity of the Skywalker saga, moving beyond the characters we know? How vital is it to open up those new realms? Kennedy says, I think it is vital. Just staying within the construct of George's storytelling, to keep chipping away at that, I think would be wrong. It's our job to step away now, but still have a connection to the mythology that George created. That won't stop, but we are moving on from the Skywalker saga. That's what's taking a lot of time, discussion, and thought right now. It's hard to accept when they're spending millions of dollars recreating Luke Skywalker for now 2 of these series. So how far are you running away? And your most talked about episodes of your series were the ones where Luke Skywalker showed up, maybe second to, or maybe, closely followed by Ahsoka Tano. Again, another George Lucas created character. I would consider that Lucasian canonical. I do like the fact that she says it still has to have a connection to the mythology. And then this gets into the Acolyte. Because Bresnikan says, well, is publishing the test kitchen for some of those new areas. I always said it was the farm team. The EU is the farm team. Now, this is really going to hurt some of you EU fans, especially classic EU. She says, yeah, it is. That's something we put into motion about 5 years ago because we don't have the benefit of just pulling a book off the shelf to adapt.
Doubling down on that dumbass statement she made years ago.
Yep.
That's a really dumb statement. But I mean, it's a commitment to the reboot of the canon, which was made very clear to us in 2014. And so Kennedy doesn't see it. She doesn't see the expanded universe. She doesn't see what went on in Star Wars storytelling prior to the Disney sale. And the way that Disney has been screwing over all these writers for royalties, I understand why she doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So, well, you can Google that story too if you want about how Disney's been screwing over these writers for their royalties for franchises like Star Wars or Marvel that was purchased by Disney. All of a sudden, they just don't acknowledge these contracts.
Well, and comic book writers and illustrators are dealing with a kind of a similar thing at the big publishers. Now that these publishers have been purchased by larger corporations, it's becoming a bigger deal.
So when Kennedy says that line about we don't have these stories on the shelf, we can't just pull them down. I think she's really coming from a place from like corporate culture as far as that stuff goes, not from like us as fans. We know the history. We remember it. We read the books. So don't tell us those books don't exist. But to her, that's the corporate culture regarding that content.
Doesn't it also? Okay, so that's the legacy expanded universe. But let's talk about the current, rebooted EU that goes back to 2014. Isn't she somewhat saying that none of those stories are worthy of adapting?
Well, from a certain point of view, I guess.
Well,
but I mean,
sort of my point of view.
It's
why would I read
culture. It's the company culture that those stories don't exist. Now, certain creatives will cherry pick from them. Guys like Filoni and Favreau will cherry pick from them to include elements in their storytelling because those were good ideas to begin with. But stories like Heir to the Empire aren't going to be adapted.
No, I'm talking about the stuff post 2014.
Oh,
the new stuff. Yeah. So isn't she essentially saying that, if none of that stuff is worthy of adaptation? If she's saying we don't have books on the shelf, there's fans of those books. I don't know very many of them. There's fans of those books.
Yeah, that stuff, it's real mediocre stuff. I think she's talking about a certain effort to get books on the shelf that have substance. And she says 5 years ago. So that would be around 2017 when they realized that they needed to start creating something in publishing to see if it sticks with the audience. And then they can mine from that.
That's the High Republic
they're taking. And there's your High Republic right there. And the jury is still out on the High Republic, trust me. And it looks like the Acolyte is something that's going to pick up in that era and reinforce a lot of the things that's been going on in publishing via live action. I think it's a risk. I really do. I had an insider reach out to me earlier this week. I would never, ever, ever in a million years reveal my source. But what this person told me was talking to an executive from Del Rey, says the books aren't selling and all the new books are bad. And that's just pillow talk going on here. But that's just what's happening. And you see things about these books landing on New York Times bestseller lists and stuff. Well, if you do any investigation, you'll find out that some of these books reached number 7 on the New York Times Galactic Empire sci-fi list.
Yeah,
it's like the best tailor-made for Star Wars.
It was the best Star Wars book put out this month. Is number one seller of all Star Wars books in May.
Look at here. And all the authors and promote themselves as New York Times best-selling authors and stuff. Well, guess what? You're not the bestseller. The name Star Wars is, for starters.
Yes.
And so I find that there's a lot of people, as I like to say, are sucking from the teat that is Star Wars and appropriating it into their own victories.
Well, let's flip back over to the main article because there is some Acolyte news in here. So Leslie Headland, showrunner and the creator of the series, is talking about the show in a little bit more detail. She says, we're taking a look at the political and personal and spiritual things that came up in a time period that we don't know much about. My question when watching The Phantom Menace was always like, well, how did things get to this point? How did we get to a point where a Sith Lord can infiltrate the Senate and none of the Jedi pick up on it? Like, what went wrong? What are the scenarios that led us to this moment? Okay, I'm with her so far.
Yeah,
that's cool.
A prequel to the prequels.
A prequel to the prequel. And I go back to the Plagueis novel, which is, yes, folks, I did read an EU book. It was... it's #1 bestseller in the Swank House Star Wars book. I haven't read a lot of them, but I did read that one and loved it. I really loved it, and I loved it from like the first chapter. So I really stuck with it, and then I also knew we were going to do a whole roundtable about it. But a component to that story that I loved was this plot of Plagueis and the Sith prior to him and all the way through Palpatine. The plot that Palpatine sort of manifests and finally makes happen had been incubating in Sith history for a long time to finally consolidate power of the galaxy. So the idea that they could maybe tap into that through the Acolyte, I think is pretty cool. Now here's where it starts to fall apart a little bit for me.
It was such smooth sailing for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. So she describes The Acolyte as a mystery thriller set in a prosperous and seemingly peaceful era when the galaxy is still sleek and glistening. So like you said, Jim, prequel of the prequels, we thought the prequels were bright and glistening. We're all going to go blind at how bright and glistening this is.
Right.
We actually use the term the Renaissance or the Age of Enlightenment, she says. Jedis, she uses the plural. Kyle does too. Kyle Newman calls them Jedis.
Yeah, you know.
We'll forgive
even
that.
the best of us.
Jedis were not always ascetic, monk-like figures living selflessly and bravely. The Jedi uniforms, she's talking about in The Acolyte, are gold and white, and it's almost like they would never get dirty. They would never be out and about. The idea is that they could have these types of uniforms because that's how little they're getting into skirmishes.
So Star Wars without Jedi getting out and about and avoiding skirmishes doesn't exactly set the table for a very exciting meal. But yeah,
sounds very bland. Can you get some salt on that meal, please?
Yeah, I mean, will we see the Jedi evolve then from the gold and white to the burlap sack look?
The tan and the cream.
Yeah. Are we going to see that evolution, or are we just going to lock in with these Jedi who never leave the temple, never get dirty, never have any conflict, live in a perfect life? There was something that really handcuffed writers of Star Trek The Next Generation when it first came out, because Gene Roddenberry insisted that these people are living in such an advanced society. There's no conflict. There's no personality conflict. Yeah, everyone is geared toward the same goal, and everyone is striving to make humanity a better existence for all. And so the writers are like, well, without any conflict, how are we going to write any compelling stories? And that, unfortunately, leads to some of the worst episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, which happened in that first season or two.
Yeah.
When Roddenberry was still alive, putting down these mandates. I've read the High Republic books, and I'm not too impressed by them, unfortunately. I think they suffer from a few things that could be easily corrected. Like there's just too many characters, way too many characters going off in all these different directions, and really nothing happens. For as different as the characters are, they're also homogenized and similar. It doesn't compel me to dive deeper into these stories than I already have. I hope that this stuff is not prevalent in the Acolyte series. The idea that it's a mystery, okay, that starts making things kind of interesting. How well can they maintain and execute the mystery? Is it a quest, a journey that we'll be going on as viewers where we can really interact with the show and play along with this mystery? You know what I mean? Or is it going to be something that's obvious to us as viewers and the characters on screen are confused about things we know? Those are like two different shows right there, two different approaches to telling the story, I should say. And I hope that it's something that we can interact with and really get into the mystery, you know. The whole who killed JR thing had us talking all summer of 19.
That's the second reference to Who Killed JR. Of this episode.
Did we have one earlier?
We had one earlier. Yeah.
You Who Killed JR. That's just, we filled our quota for the month of most Dallas references on Rebel Force Radio. Both you and me, we covered that. I thought somebody had planted that in my head somewhere along the line tonight. But it fits. It
does fit.
You know, that was a very interactive experience for television viewers of that era. Who Killed JR? It was a cliffhanger. We all talked about it. Even going back to Star Trek The Next Generation, the whole Borg thing at the end of season 3.
Oh, boy.
Picard was captured by the Borg, and they left us hanging cliffhanger for 4 months there over the summer. And fans talked, and that's like interactive, you know,
right?
Where we actually become part of the story. We're investigating
the water cooler
stuff
along
with the characters,
as they used
water
to say.
Cooler stuff, all that. So hopefully they'll execute it like that. It'll be really fun and exciting. because these Jedi aren't getting in skirmishes. We're going to need something to titillate us along the way.
No doubt.
But I think that's just kind of a boilerplate breakdown of what's going on with the show. I'm quite certain that if Jedi are involved in a Star Wars streaming series, lightsabers will be ignited. So I think there'll be more action than she's tipping her hat to. I hope.
Yeah. There's still so much more to get to. Do you want to continue covering this, or do you want to flip to because we only got like 10, 15 minutes left?
We're running short on time. Boy, this is big stuff, and we're going to be, it'll be weeks before we get back to this. And by that point, it might not even be worth talking about, really.
Well, I think
spent a lot of time on the Acolyte.
Yeah.
There's an Untitled Kids series coming up. A lot of people have referred to that as Stranger Things in the Star Wars universe. Some people are saying Goonies, Star Wars Goonies it could be. We'll see how that goes. It's being presented by director John Watts and writer Chris Ford, who made the Spider-Man film. John Watts is a good director for Marvel, and it's not uncommon now for Lucasfilm to be tapping into Marvel for help with Star Wars. Obviously, Jon Favreau has a long career with Marvel. Like I said, there's a pipeline open here.
John Watts, Taika Waititi, Kevin Feige.
So we see that there's a Untitled Kid series. We'll probably get information about this series in Anaheim.
Yes.
What else do we really need to talk about here, Jason?
We can talk about the films. Patty Jenkins, that's delayed, the Rogue Squadron film.
First official news of it being delayed. There have been reports of it being delayed, and that there were some creative differences going on with Patty Jenkins and Lucasfilm. In this article, it just says Rogue Squadron from Wonder Woman director Patty Jenkins is further off. I believe it's referred to in the Kathleen Kennedy extended interview. What we're hearing behind the scenes is that while Patty Jenkins might be doing some work on a script, it's becoming more and more unlikely that she'll actually be sitting in the director's chair for this film. That's just something that
Kathleen Kennedy says that Patty is developing the script further, so it's being pushed off to the side for the moment. She says, and then we'll talk about how that connects to the central spine that we're working on. Mm-hmm. As far as the they still don't want to let go of this pipe dream of the Rian Johnson trilogy. She just basically says, well, Ryan's been real busy with Knives Out and his Netflix deal, which is not really the case, because he only took that Netflix deal, I think, because the Star Wars trilogy was not going to happen.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. She makes it seem like Rian Johnson's busy schedule is the reason why his trilogy is being put on the back burner. That's not true at all. His trilogy was announced prior to the release of The Last Jedi. Right. I recall this because I was like, wow, they must have a lot of confidence in The Last Jedi. And the big reason was they loved working with Rian so much that they wanted to continue that collaboration into the future. So Rian was set to dive right into Star Wars trilogy immediately following wrapping up The Last Jedi. It wasn't until he sold Knives Out, which was after he was told, hey, you might want to just do something else right now because we're not ready to make your trilogy.
Let's let this cool off.
His trilogy was put on the back burner about 3 months after The Last Jedi came and went out of theaters.
Yeah.
And that's why Rian then pursued Knives Out. And then with the success of Knives Out, Netflix came knocking at his door. Not Lucasfilm, Netflix came knocking at his door, and he signed a development deal with them.
The things that Rian Johnson has on his plate right now are 2 sequels to Knives Out and a TV deal with Paramount to write and direct a show called Poker Face. Now, why would Rian Johnson take on all of these projects left and right and build his own production company at the same time and sign this big deal with Netflix if the Star Wars trilogy was on the horizon for him? He wouldn't. And the reason why Kathleen Kennedy continues along with this narrative is because by saying that Ryan is not doing a film, by saying his trilogy's been canceled, she is then admitting that The Last Jedi was a failure. Now, that doesn't rule out the possibility he could come back and work in Star Wars in some capacity, like maybe on a streaming series, an episode or two. Ryan, of course, does have a lot of television experience with things like Breaking Bad and this Poker Face show he's working on. But their reluctance to publicly cancel Rian Johnson's trilogy is only an effort to save face. Something kind of crazy and weird is that when they announced Rian Johnson's trilogy back in late 2017, they wanted to continue working with Ryan and Ron Bergman and everybody. But shortly after that, there was the fallout from The Last Jedi, and Ryan was told, we're going to put your trilogy on ice for a while. Lucasfilm also fired Carrie Hart, or she left. It's very mysterious why she's no longer with the company, but I think that she's
talked about in this article. They refer to her as then Lucasfilm executive.
Mm. Yeah. And where did Carrie Hart go? She signed on with Ryan's production company.
I see.
So they can continue to collaborate, but Ryan is not really collaborating.
Just keep
so
them
much
both the hell away from Star Wars, as far away from Star Wars as possible, please.
Kennedy has mentioned that Ryan has remained within the Brain Trust and has been involved in conversations regarding Star Wars.
But don't think that's true.
I think I do think that's true. I totally think that's true. I don't think it was Kathleen Kennedy's call to put Ryan's trilogy on the back burner. I think that came from Disney corporate. They're the ones.
So she's protesting by keeping Ryan around in these story development meetings? You think he's sitting there with Favreau and Filoni? Maybe he's advising on High Republic novels.
Perhaps. But all I know is that she really likes him and enjoys working with him. And
Story Group loved him.
I mean, just friendship alone, you know? I mean, why should that be discontinued? I think they, honestly believe that somewhere down the road, they're going to make this Rian Johnson trilogy. Well, maybe not trilogy, which is kind of interesting as well, because Kathleen Kennedy says in the same interview that she doesn't really see the company continuing with trilogies. She's looking at it as more of just broad storytelling, which with each release being a different chapter of the Star Wars saga, as opposed to being condensed into trilogies. They want to get away from that.
Yeah.
So how Ryan can still have a trilogy existing in production at this point is near impossible. I think that if he does return, it will be for a standalone film or a streaming series. I do not see him putting together a trilogy. And when Ryan actually is freed up to work on Star Wars, we're probably talking, anywhere from 7 to 10 years down the road. And maybe they're banking on something like nostalgia, sequel trilogy nostalgia will buoy this idea of a Rian Johnson return to Star Wars up above water. But until that happens, if it happens, then there's
it takes about a generation for that to it takes about a generation for that to happen. It's somewhere between 10, 15 years before you start feeling the nostalgia tug on something. But to go back real quick, because I think it's very important that we are clear about this, because it was kind of a throwaway line. She says, I've had meetings with Ryan. He's somebody that's come in as part of our little brain trust discussions along the way. So who knows? That doesn't mean, that he's sitting there with Favreau and Filoni, but who knows? That could just mean brunch with Kathleen Kennedy.
Yeah, he hangs out with her and Michelle Rejwan or whoever, and they like him. Like I said, they like him. I mean, they have a friendship with him and everything.
Well, I like my cat too, but I don't want my cat writing Star Wars. I can't let this go without talking about it, because it just was like, Wow. Talk about never learning. Bresnikan says, in your filmography, you've made silly comedies, heavy dramas, historical films, and sci-fi movies. Do you ever see Star Wars branching off into different genres? Now, if he was honest, if he was an honest reporter, he would say, I recall that at one time being a goal that you stated that you wanted Star Wars to branch out into different genres. So what's her answer? She says, I think that's exactly why I get excited about working on Star Wars. George was inspired by so many different genres. I love that. In fact, that is a tenet of any story discussion we're having. I usually start by saying, what genre is this? To which everyone yells back at me, it's Star Wars. That's the genre, Kathleen. It's become its own genre. So it is funny to me that she's pretending like this wasn't already put in place and failed miserably with the war picture Rogue One and the comedy Solo.
She's transparent in certain areas and then doubles down on some really stupid things. And this is one of them, this whole genre idea. George was inspired by many different genres, yes. But you know what he did? He took them all and threw them into a melting pot and combined them and tried to create something universal and timeless. He never, ever approached it as a genre film. He never treated Star Wars like science fiction. He added Western elements. He added mythology elements. He added religious elements. He added technology. All of those things created Star Wars. That, as you so keenly stated, Jason, is the genre. When she comes in and usually starts by saying, what genre is this? She's already failed.
Right. Yes.
The production. She's already failed the litmus test to run this production. She still doesn't get it. It's a melting pot. It's not a genre.
That is why you fail. All right, let's play a few of these clips of Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor out on the PR trail. As we said, this coming up, this is Hayden talking to the Cutaway with William Mullally.
Mullally. This is an interview. William, he is a correspondent for Esquire, among other publications, and he had Hayden on his channel and discussed with him what it took to get him, and this is something that's come up a few times on the show, so maybe we'll get some clarity here, but what it took for him to agree to return to Star Wars.
All right, let's find out.
It meant a great deal to me. This is a character that has sort of defined my life in so many ways. And getting to sort of continue my journey with him is just hugely meaningful. There wasn't a lot to wrestle with. It was a pretty easy decision. When I got the phone call and the invitation to come back, it was a very quick yes.
It was a very quick yes. Okay.
Very quick.
But they called him, right?
Yeah. Of course they did.
All right, I was just making sure.
I'm saying, you got anything for Anakin? Anything floating around there?
Oh, no. Apparently, he and Ewan were just desperate to do this project. So, according to Kathleen. No, that's great to hear. And what else we got here?
Well, naturally, he hasn't been seen playing the character really since 2005, 17 years ago. So what's it been like for him to return to the role after all this time?
Part of what's really sort of interesting about coming back now after all of this time is just sort of being in a different place in my life and having sort of a new perspective on my work. And coming back to a character that I've already played before, after all this time, it's just like an interesting exercise in my craft.
All right.
So he seeks the challenge of returning. And it's also something it's a character he's been living with for a long time too. It's not like he tried to sweep the experience under the rug and move forward. It's something that he's grown comfortable with and considers a real true highlight of his career, which of course it is. He's not only returning to play Anakin, which I think we'll be seeing in flashbacks, still no confirmation of that,
but the character's name has been brought up so many times in conversation. Hayden basically says, "I play Anakin Skywalker in the show."
He absolutely does. Yeah, he said it.
Well, let's talk about, let's hear what Hayden has to say about where the character of Anakin / Darth Vader is at this point in the character's life.
This is sort of a point in the timeline that hasn't really been explored yet, and I think that the character of Darth Vader is at an interesting place in his life, in terms of what has happened before and where we left him in Episode 3. He's very much sort of trying to reconcile his past, and hunting down the Jedi. Obviously it's his job, and he's mandated by the Emperor, but it's more than that. It's a personal mission for him.
Reconcile his past. Now, what does that mean from the perspective of Darth Vader, to reconcile his past? Is it becoming more evil, to bury any sort of good deed he's done in the past and establish himself as Darth Vader, fully become immersed in the persona of the Dark Lord of the Sith? Or is he still hurting from decisions he made, and including the death of his wife and the destruction of the Jedi? Is he still dealing with feelings regarding that? Regrets? Are we going to see a regretful Darth Vader? This is something that I've always kind of shrugged off a lot, but it seems almost human in nature for us to be exposed to the character dealing with that transformation and how it affects him on a psychological level.
Well, one way to, another, in this context, I think you could also substitute the word accept for reconcile. I don't think that, he's not trying to take, like reconcile. One way to look at the word is if you've got two parties and you're trying to get them to agree to something, you can reconcile the two parties. In this case, I think it's really about him accepting where he is right now, his fate. Yeah. So perhaps, we've had this discussion, Jim, since 2005. We didn't know each other then, but we've had this discussion in the life of this podcast is, when does he become Vader? What's the moment? We've had different opinions about it through the years, and maybe part of this Obi-Wan Kenobi story is to tell the story when he reconciles and finally accepts his fate. Yeah. We may see it play out in this series.
We might see that moment when he's able to really bury the light side of his past. And even it goes deeper than that. Maybe he's still carrying around baggage from being a young slave boy and being there, witnessing the death of his mother and all of that stuff. There's skeletons in the closet that go beyond his acceptance of the dark side. And so he might be trying to deal with a lot of that stuff as well.
Yeah,
playing head games with.
Oh, he's got a lot. You talk about baggage. I mean, he's dragging a lot. He's dragging cases of baggage. So what's next?
One more cut from Hayden. You can rewind this show back 15 years, 16 years, and you'll hear us talking about things like, the prequel trilogy will someday be appreciated. Someday the fans of that era will have nostalgia for the prequel trilogy, and they will love it and speak openly about it, and people will start to respect the prequel trilogy more than it ever has been respected before. I think we finally reached that apex. I think we're there, man. And Hayden talks a little bit about how there's a sense of newfound fan support, specifically from those fans who grew up with the prequels. And here's what he thinks about that.
It's just been, really heartwarming. I can't really tell you what it means to me, but it's a really neat thing. I don't know that I can really define it, but I guess the moral of the story is patience.
Stick around.
That's well said. I really like the way he says that. Because, there's so much more he could say, but he just sort of boils it down to patience. And that is something that Obi-Wan says to him. Patience. Says that to him in episode 2.
It reveals something to me when he talks about patience, is that there may have been times in the past where he became a little impatient with Star Wars and was not too happy with the way things went down and the way that the fans jumped all over him and his performance and chemistry or lack thereof with Natalie Portman and everything else under the sun.
Yeah, I think she's about as much to blame as he was for that, honestly.
Sure. Of course. And you got to pass along some of the blame to George Lucas himself, too.
Right.
It's not like he's, it's not like he's the captain of a sinking ship all on his own. It was a different approach than people were expecting. And there were limitations with how he could perform with all the tech going on around him and everything. Ewan McGregor speaks openly about that in just about every interview he's done for Kenobi at this point. Frustrations with the technology and stuff, and the disadvantage it put him as an actor by just performing with nobody in front of a green
he came
screen.
out of, all of these indie films over in the UK where they had shoestring budgets, and it was all about what was happening, the camera capturing the moment as it was happening with the environment around it, all of that. I mean, that's a hallmark of indie filmmaking. And then to go from that to what he did, where it was, I think there had to have been a moment, and he may have even said this. It was like, oh, this is it? Like, this is making Star Wars? This is what it is? Just jumping around on these green foam structures or whatever?
Mm-hmm. And there's parallels to what you just said about Ewan's career when you think about Hayden Christensen. It's not like he was steeped in a career with special effects laden blockbusters. No, he was coming from
TV,
Canadian stages in Vancouver and television shows and indie dramas. He was coming from the same place. He didn't have that experience. He got thrown into the machine. So again, not making excuses for Hayden, but it's nice to see him emerge on the other end, especially as myself. I am a prequel fan, so I'm happy and refreshed to know that things kind of played out the way I predicted they would. I knew someday that people would start having an appreciation for the prequels. We have clips from Ewan McGregor. I'm going to tell you what. Let's just play the last clip. We'll wrap up the show with it. It's Ewan talking about what the biggest challenge for him playing Obi-Wan has been, not only in this current series, but even going back to the prequels.
I have to become Alec Guinness. So that's my real, when I'm playing this part, that's really my thought is like, does it feel like him? Does it, I know it's me and it's also him, but I like it to sound a bit like him or feel like him somehow. So, and some of that lightness comes from Alec Guinness for sure. That was in his performance,
Yeah, it's great. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about, the ability to recast these characters. It can be done if it's done well.
Well, I got something to say about that. Because there's been a lot of talk online about Kathleen Kennedy's statement about recasting characters and people saying, well, what about Ewan McGregor? I mean, for crying out loud. But playing a younger version of the character is not the same as playing a legacy character, okay? Nobody's dressing up Ewan McGregor in a white beard with white hair and putting him in there in those long robes and stuff. He's not playing Alec Guinness's character. He's playing a younger version of that character. We've seen in films for years and years two actors playing the same character in the same film. One plays a younger version, one plays an older version. I mean, Godfather 2, for crying out loud, had Robert De Niro playing a young version of the character made famous by crazy old
Marlon Brando.
Corleone, Marlon Brando. How can I space his name? Marlon Brando. But it's two different characters. He's playing a young version in the original Superman, a younger actor playing young Clark Kent before the movie transitioned into Christopher Reeve. That's been going on in Hollywood forever. We had always heard that the Star Wars prequels were going to focus on Obi-Wan Kenobi. Nobody ever assumed that it was going to be Alec Guinness or a deepfake Alec Guinness playing the character. That's two totally different things, as opposed to taking Alden Ehrenreich and dropping him into
He's
the
also
same
playing
era.
a young Han Solo.
Yeah, but no, he's not.
Yes, he
He's
is.
not.
Yes,
No,
he
because
is.
Alec
He's a
Guinness,
kid on
Alec Guinness was
Corellia.
at the end. Alec Guinness was a senior citizen by the time he was shooting as Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was at the end of the character's arc. To go back and show him as a 20-something-year-old, you have to recast. Alden Ehrenreich was playing essentially the same character Harrison Ford played in the same era, maybe minus 5 years. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. So, I mean, it's two vastly different things. And also, Ewan McGregor owns the role from the fact that he played it in 3 films already. You know, it's not a recasting in that sense, is what I'm saying. It's a totally different beast. If you want to take Luke Skywalker a couple years after Return of the Jedi and put a different actor playing him, that is a dangerous recasting. Taking Alec Guinness's character and making him 40 years younger via Ewan McGregor, that is not dangerous miscasting. That's basically
a different
correct.
character.
I mean,
You're saying
I was
it's a
going to say
different
that
character.
it is a different character. It really is. So that's the dangerous part. Like taking a Millie Bobby Brown, Sebastian Stan, and Alden Ehrenreich and shooting a Star Wars story that happens between Star Wars and Empire with those actors. Let's just say, who's going to buy it? Who's going to buy it?
I don't know. I think if it was done well, it would make all the difference.
I think we're a ways away from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
These actors they're still too fresh in their performances. Now, I'll tell you what, there might be a little bit of leeway if you didn't bring them back for the sequel trilogy. Okay? If you didn't have Han, Luke, and Leia in the sequel trilogy and then decided to recast the actors, then maybe I think you might get away with it a little bit better. But the performances are still too fresh. They're too fresh. And the ownership of those actors, of those roles, is still too fresh.
Well, but you could also argue that the space and age between Alec Guinness and Ewan McGregor is now the same space and age as Han Solo as we see him in The Force Awakens.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Ewan's already claimed ownership of the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi through 3 films that came out from 1999 to 2005.
Hey,
the foundation's already there.
I'm long on record of recasting. I wanted Kate Mulgrew to come in and be Leia for episode 9,
so
but
funny.
Instead,
it's so funny you bring that up. I was just thinking about your rant about that the other day. I was just thinking about that. It was a classic rant.
Well, all right. So if we can't do Star Wars with the legacy characters anymore, then I guess, where does that leave us? Doesn't leave us. I guess we have to get used to the Acolyte and the High Republic.
And deepfake. Don't forget deepfake.
Well, deepfake. Kathleen Kennedy doesn't say anything about deepfake here. I mean, and that's the elephant in the room that she's not acknowledging at all.
Well, you're absolutely right, because I think that forced her decision to say, well, we're never recasting again. I don't think it was so much Alden. I think it was an advancement in technology that saved her hide.
Interesting. All right. Well, we'll see you next time. For more Rebel Force Radio in your life, we would love for you to check us out over on Patreon. Go to rebelforceradio.com, click on the Patreon banner, and poof, you'll be there, and you can pick the subscription level that fits your budget and your taste for the content that's there, including exclusive podcasts like RFR Q&A, the Babu Freaks, Clone Wars Declassified, Remastered, Filoni Files, archive highlights, and so much more. It's really a great community of Star Wars fans, the best Star Wars fans in the galaxy. Details at patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio. Check us out on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rebel Force Radio. And we love to have your voicemails and your emails. Please, more voicemails. We know you love to write. Man, do Star Wars fans love to write. The email address is show@rebelforceradio.com, but that voicemail line, 708-320-1737. That's 708-320-1RFR. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. Check us out there. But above all, we just appreciate you listening and spreading the word about Rebel Force Radio to the Star Wars, your fellow Star Wars fans. If they haven't heard about the show, please let them know. And we are streaming 24/7 on services like Apple Podcasts, iHeart, TuneIn, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon, Audible, Pandora, Samsung, anywhere you can find podcasts, you'll find us right here. We love to have you subscribe. We love to have the reviews. Just one rule, please.
Make them good.
And you do make them good, and we read them all. It's one of the highlights of my Monday is getting those reviews sent into the inbox. All right, that's it. We'll see you next time.
They still say, some of them still say, bring back Pete. So I don't know why that's such a big highlight for you, but whatever.
Talk about nostalgia.
It's only been like 13 years, but whatever.
All right, we'll see you next time. For Rebel Force Radio, I'm Jason.
I'm Jimmy Mack.
And remember,
The Force will be with you, always.